All right, so let's start off in the D tier. And the first dungeon that will be in the D tier today will be The Other Side. Yo, what's up, guys? We're back again with another video today, and today we're going to be talking about The Other Side, the other D tier dungeon that was ranked on my tier list. We're going to be going through the upsides, the downsides, and basically giving rationale for the reason that I gave it a D more in depth than what I necessarily gave in that video. So yeah, if you guys would like, I hope you guys would check out the previous couple of videos I did in the Necrotic Wake and Plaguefall, and then if you guys are looking for more like the initial tier list, you can check that video out from a couple days ago as well. But without further ado, let's jump straight into the video. So starting with the upsides of this dungeon, I feel like the Dreamer area is actually super cool. The moth mobs, which force your group mates to jump or get a dispel in conjunction with like the sick boss fight, really makes this part of the dungeon feel super unique. There's also a mini boss dragon there that I have found is really not that bad either, not Shadow of Zul-esque where he's just terribly annoying. So I feel like this whole area, in terms of the thematics, how it really feels to pull, and just like how it flows with the rest of the dungeon, kind of feels disjointed, but at the same time it feels disjointed in a great way because the trash is fun, engaging, and at the same time the boss in this section is also cool. Tacking onto that, the Dreamer boss forces you to get launched up into the air whenever the bombs are coming out, otherwise you get blown up or explode on your group depending on how it's going and depending on what the mechanic that the Dreamer himself is actually doing. I just think that a mechanic like this is a better interpretation of like a line of sight style mechanic where you do have to get launched up and you're going to have downtime off the boss, but you're doing it in a way where you're getting knocked up in order to be able to dodge the ability. It's very, if you remember Lady Hate Coil from Eye of Ashara, kind of similar to that. The next upside is having split up into groups on the final boss Moysala and determining how many of those mini boss style mobs that you can kill at once with your setup is pretty interesting. Basically, you don't end up needing a tank for the Moysala, I don't even know what to call them, copies that you have to end up killing that end up giving you that buff towards the end that goes on to Moysala. But the strategy behind determining how many people are going to go to what side, how are you going to even get there, like whether or not you're having your group mate run or take the teleporter, and just like what you're going to end up doing with that, the strategy behind that fight is actually very interesting to be able to set up, and I do like that part of it. So as sad as it is to say, I feel like that is all of the upsides of the dungeon. I really do like that Dreamer area though, and if they could have expanded a little bit more on that, I feel like the dungeon would have been slightly better. Let's talk about the downsides. Basically, the first huge error that I have with this dungeon is there's a terrible checkpoint system in place. Basically, I talked about it in the tier list video. Once you enter a side area, you have a checkpoint at the very beginning of the side area. This makes sense. Then, once you kill the final boss of a side area, your checkpoint updates to be the final boss of that side area. Then you must leave the side area, coming back through the entrance. You don't update your checkpoint, and so then you start to make your way towards the next side area, going through the main circle, like the main ring around the room, clearing out some trash. To where the point is, if you die at that point, then you are sent back all the way to the very end of the previous side area of the boss that you just most recently killed, forcing you to have really long run back. And basically, I don't understand why they don't update checkpoints like once you pass them, because it would make a lot more sense that after you end up killing the final boss, or like the boss in that wing, your checkpoint is still actually updated at the very beginning of that wing. That would just make the most sense in terms of how to lay out the checkpoints in this dungeon as a whole. Another huge downside of this is that you go approximately 25% over enemy forces count. So there are a lot of packs that are just like you have to pull them. Like basically anything that's in the inner ring where Moysala is going to spawn, that's all trash that you have to pull. Trash that's on the way to the Mana Storms and Hakar really doesn't feel like it's negotiable trash in terms of how you're going to be able to skip doing that, especially the Mana Storm stuff with like just where it's spawning with that river of slime. A lot of that stuff does not feel skippable. The stuff in the Dreamer area does feel slightly skippable, but even then, if you're just holding W and taking like a natural path through the dungeon, you're going to end up going about 25% over enemy forces count. I feel like opening up the Hakar and the Mana Storm area in order for you to be able to allow you to skip a little bit more trash would make a lot more sense, because the Dreamer area is already so open that you can kind of skip some trash if you really want to walk around it, or you could pull more if you feel like you are undercount. Alternatively, they could just increase the count required to be able to do this dungeon as a whole, and then proportionally increase the timer value to where it doesn't feel like you are just getting straight up nerfed because somehow the timer is going to be harder relative to you having to do 25% more enemy forces. But you're already doing it anyway, so it's not like it's actually any different. So speaking of Hakar and the Mana Storms, those bosses are actually just quite annoying. So Hakar, after a certain period of time, he will end up putting a very substantially large shield on himself that you have to be able to DPS through, while at the same time your other players that are, I think your tank is excluded, is being fixated by these little birds, and you're kind of running around and having to kill off these birds while you're at the same time you're trying to DPS through Hakar's shield, where he's doing this blood spout ability at you. I think that this in of itself is a very unfun fight, and it creates some questions of how tyrannical is going to be on this fight. There are a lot of bosses in a lot of dungeons that are dying fairly quickly right now, but I suspect that once you start getting up to the 2 to 3 minute range, Hakar is going to be one of these bosses that you identify very quickly as something that's going to be overtuned because of how his mechanics end up working out. The Mana Storms punish you for actually killing the boss too quickly. So you have to have Millhouse and Maleficent up at the same time in order to be able to cancel off one another's abilities. Millhouse has the Shadow Fury ability that is able to cancel Maleficent's like chicken barrage, and then Maleficent does, I don't remember what the ability is to Millhouse to be able to make him more doable as well. So you have to have them up in succession, but they're not active at the same time. And while, as funny as it sounds, is while Millhouse is actually active, Maleficent is off to the side throwing these wrenches at your nearest target player, which I don't know if that's supposed to be your tank or like what the deal is supposed to be with that. But this is like, the Mana Storms are like a strictly worse version of Galvast, if you guys remember that boss from Temple of Sethralus, and it just becomes very, very annoying to be able to coordinate soaking the pillars that you have to for Millhouse, being able to coordinate a invisible Shadow Fury onto Maleficent whenever she starts casting her ability, and just dealing with this boss in a way that is going to be friendly towards the whole entire group. I find this boss just so annoying and unfun to be able to deal with. The next thing, Moysala kills himself, which makes the damage you applied to him fairly worthless in the first phase, meaning that like once you end up going and fighting off his copies, you end up hitting the totem. Then you'll have Juan Samdi, or I don't know, Trollman number 6 or whatever the hell he is, standing there. He's going to zap Moysala based on how many of those carbon copies you did and give you a pretty substantial damage buff. But the downside of this is I don't feel like you can actually kill Moysala without like the damage buff itself. I think you only have to get him to like 30% HP, but if you end up missing the push, you have to go do another phase. Like there's no real way for you to be able to beat the boss while you're in the normal phase. So it's either going to be one phase of the mirror images that you're able to kill, depending on how your group comp is set up, or 2 phases, because then you're going to have to be able to zap him down with the second Juan Samdi, whatever, troll buff again, to be able to deal with him. The last thing that I have on the downsides is that none of the trash feels fun to play. All of it feels like you either need kicks, line of sight, or to kite. The exception here being the Dreamer area that I talked about before, but there are like these hounds that are in the area towards the Mana Storms that you have to end up like line of sighting. There's a lot of kicks on the way to the Mana Storms with these lubricate like Blade Storm style mobs. All of the trash outside of Moysala is really annoying, with like the notable one being, I don't even know what he is, like a big Chungus troll in a mask that he will like spawn a bunch of mirror images of himself along the whole entire platform, and you have to dodge well out of the way to be able to deal with that mask like explosion, because they explode after a certain period of time. Like they have an arming time before they explode. I think that this trash, like once you do this dungeon, you'll know what I'm talking about. Just none of it feels absolutely fun to play. Like whenever I was talking about the dungeons themselves and I said that there needed to be some level of fun versus engaging trash and bosses, this dungeon has a lot of unfun trash and a lot of unfun bosses that are not engaging and don't feel satisfying to play. And that's ultimately like one of the biggest problems, is like it can be hard. Like, things are allowed to be hard in dungeons if they do feel satisfying at the end of the day once you are able to pull them off. But whenever they neither feel fun nor satisfying, you're like, oh, this is actually just terrible. And I feel like they missed the mark for a lot of this in the other side. I don't exactly know how you would fix it. Like, some of the stuff, the bad checkpoint system feels easy to fix. Going 25% over enemy forces count also feels easy to fix. But then, like, the Hakar and the Mana Storm problem would require, I think, a redesign of the fight. Same with how some of the trash ends up working out. You would need almost a fundamental redesign of how all of that stuff ends up working. So yeah, those are the downsides. Again, like, how I would really fix it is I would just like fix the checkpoint system and like fix the going over 25% enemy forces count. Between Hakar and the Mana Storms, I would probably look at Hakar not being like just grossly overtuned and tyrannical. That shield is really rough, man. Like, you have to kill through that shield very frequently, and a lot of dungeon bosses in Shadowlands phase on like percentage HP timers. Maybe Hakar, instead of phasing after time, could phase off like a percentage HP timer and not spawn 1,000 bats at a time that you have to end up dealing with. The Mana Storms, I think you could start by making the Shadow Fury visible and like make Maleficent not throw wrenches at you while you're fighting Millhouse. And then Moysala, dude, I don't really know what you're supposed to do about that. Like, killing the carbon copies of him is like an interesting mechanic, and like you have to allocate group members to it. But at the same time, you don't want it to do 100% of the boss killing for you. There's definitely some give and take there. I don't really exactly know how to fix the trash without like a fundamental redesign, which is not really reasonable, especially this late into the development cycle of dungeons. But maybe there is room for something like that. So yeah, beyond all of that, this was the other side. This was the reasoning that I gave it a D tier. We will be back tomorrow with another dungeon. I think I'll probably be doing Spire's Ascension if I had to guess. I'm not 100% sold on what I'm going to be doing yet. I hope you guys have been enjoying the series, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow.